passes, that condition is getting worse.
Not for the first time, developments in science are outpacing the debate in society. It'll now be up to MPs to decide whether this work on hybrid embryos should be allowed to continue or be banned for good. Hugh.
Fergus, thank you very much. Fergus Walsh there with that exclusive report from Newcastle. 2 Royal Marines who were killed in an explosion in southern Afghanistan have been named as 23-year-old Lieutenant John Thornton and 22-year-old Marine David Marsh. They were on patrol near Kajaki in Helmand province on Sunday evening when their vehicle was caught in the blast. Plans to withdraw more British forces from Iraq have been put on hold. Des Brown, the Defence Secretary, told MPs that it was the right decision because of the ongoing security situation in Basra. Iraqi soldiers have been fighting Shia militias in the region, supported by British forces. Our diplomatic correspondent, James Robbins, is at the Ministry of Defence. James, what does all this tell us about the state of things in Basra?
Well, the government, Hugh, says that circumstances have changed in Iraq. They undoubtedly have, since Gordon Brown controversially announced a phased withdrawal of British forces last October at the height of election fever. He sketched out a timetable which would have had some British troops withdrawing about now, bringing the numbers down to about 2,500. Well, that was blown off course by the scale of the fighting in Basra over the past week when Iraqi forces launched a major offensive against the Shia militia of Muqtada al-Sadr. Now, Britain was involved actively in support of that operation, with helicopters, with fast jets, with tanks, with artillery. The artillery was even used as Britain was drawn into the fighting. Well, that changed everything, and against that background, the government felt it was impossible to go ahead with the withdrawal timetable as it had been set out. That, of course, will be disappointing to families of those who might have expected to come home about now. Some MPs said it would be much better if the Prime Minister had never set out that timetable rather than break it. But I think the news will be pleasing to America's top commander in Iraq, General David Petraeus. He, after all, is leading an American troop surge at the moment. Hugh.
James, many thanks. James Robbins there at the Ministry of Defence. The time is 6:15. Our main story tonight. There are signs of dramatic change in Zimbabwe amid claims from the opposition sources that President Mugabe is about to step aside. And coming up, we are on board with the Red Arrows on a flypast over London to mark the RAF's 90th anniversary.
And in Spotlight, a warning that cuts in the region's fire control staff could endanger lives. Teething trouble for many in the region with the new free bus pass scheme. And the lost film which shows a popular Devon resort in its glorious heyday.
Paul Burrell, who served as butler to Diana, Princess of Wales, did not tell the whole truth at the inquest into her death. That's the view of the coroner, Lord Justice Scott Baker, who's been summing up for a second day. He described Mr Burrell's behaviour as pretty shabby. Here's our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell.
He was just one of nearly 250 witnesses, yet his evidence and his behaviour have attracted considerable criticism. Yesterday, the coroner said Paul Burrell had lied in the witness box. Today, he added further comments. Lord Justice Scott Baker said, "It was blindingly obvious that the evidence he gave was not the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. In a number of ways, he cashed in on his self-styled position as being Diana's rock." Paul Burrell's behaviour, the coroner added, had been pretty shabby, and his evidence should be treated with caution. The coroner has also dealt with the central issue of Henri Paul and alcohol. He said the man who drove the Mercedes was known to have been served 2 large measures of Ricard at the Ritz bar, the equivalent, he said, of 4 single whiskies. What is clear is that staff at the Ritz knew Henri Paul had been drinking before he drove that night. Lord Justice Scott Baker said it was unfortunate that the French pathologists who carried out the first post-mortem on Henri Paul had refused to give evidence to answer questions about the blood samples. One aspect of the toxicology, an abnormally high carbon monoxide reading, remained a mystery, he said. Turning to the crash itself, the coroner said witnesses in the Alma tunnel ranged from the patently honest to those whose evidence was worthless.
Lord Justice Scott Baker is expected to complete his summing up late tomorrow morning. Then the jury will retire to consider its verdicts. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News, at the High Court.
Britain's biggest teaching union, the NUT, is calling its members out on strike next month. The one-day stoppage will affect England and Wales, the first on this scale for around 21 years. The NUT is demanding a 10% pay rise, says its members are sick and tired of below-inflation pay deals. Our education correspondent, James Westhead, is here. James, if this goes ahead, what kind of impact would it have?
A big impact. The NUT would say they represent more than half of all teachers in England and Wales. So if they can mobilise their members, then that could mean many schools closing, many pupils having to stay at home. Now, the NUT is, however, looking rather isolated because all the other teaching unions have rejected strike action and welcomed this pay deal, which they argue is slightly better than most other public sector workers and was, after all, agreed by, recommended by an independent pay review body.
Very briefly, is it certain to go ahead, the strike?
Well, it's possible that it could be averted, but it's looking very unlikely. It's almost certain that it will go ahead. It's a one-day strike, April the 24th. Could be some disruption for pupils, schools and parents.
James, thank you very much. James Westhead there. The Speaker of the House of Commons, Michael Martin, is going to be investigated by the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards. John Lyon will consider whether any rules were broken when the Speaker's wife spent more than £4,000 of public money on taxi fares. James Landale has this report.
3 months ago, it emerged that the Speaker's wife, Mary Martin, had spent more than £4,000 on taxis since 2004, and then claimed the lot on expenses. At first, the Speaker's spokesman said Mrs Martin was on official business and accompanied by a Commons official, but it soon became clear she was actually out shopping with her housekeeper. The spokesman resigned, claiming he'd been misled. Not surprisingly, a complaint was lodged with the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards.
There are suggestions that Mr Martin may not have been using his expenses properly. That's what we've asked to investigate, and it is something that worries the public. As long as these things remain behind closed doors, there will be concern about them.
In his reply to the complaint, the Commissioner, John Lyon, said he accepted that Mrs Martin's conduct may not have been in accordance with the MP's Code of Conduct and would therefore investigate. Tonight, a spokesman for the Speaker refused to make any comment, except to say that the Speaker's office had already received an initial inquiry from Mr Lyon and had responded to those questions. 7 years on since he was ceremonially dragged to his chair, the question now is whether the Speaker will be able to continue leading his own review of MPs' expenses when he's under investigation himself. James Landale, BBC News, Westminster.
2 young sisters have found a severed head of a woman on a beach in Scotland. The discovery was made in Arbroath. Police say a hand has also been recovered from the beach, and they confirmed that an investigation is underway. The Royal Air Force is celebrating its 90th birthday today and marked the anniversary by organising a fly-past along the River Thames, one of many special events being organised here in Britain and in Iraq and in Afghanistan, by the way. Our correspondent Nick Ravenscroft joined the Red Arrows as they flew over London, and as you're about to see, it was an experience he is unlikely to forget.
The public face of the RAF. Breathtaking stunts and precision flying. But 90 years ago, it was all a bit less high-octane. At the end of World War I, when the Royal Air Force was formed, these aviation relics were seen as cutting edge. Though it was the Second World War which showed how vital planes were in warfare. The Battle of Britain fought in the skies, prompting Winston Churchill's famous address.
Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few.
The Red Arrows led today's anniversary celebrations.
All of the pilots on my squadron have served on operational detachments and exercises, as well as some of my ground crew at the moment. My engineer and support staff are serving in Iraq and Afghanistan.
We set out from the Red Arrows home near Lincoln, accompanied by 4 of the new generation of Typhoon jets, flying over RAF bases dotted across the country. And then a salute in the skies above the capital.
Well, we're now just 400 metres above the River Thames, with London's landmarks flashing by on either side at half the speed of sound.
After 3 years in the Red Arrows, it's back to normal operations. But this is the show-off side of pilot life. And boy, do they enjoy it.
And so the RAF, 90 years old today, and celebrating in style. Nick Ravenscroft, BBC News, with the red arrows.
In Scotland, prescription charges have been cut by nearly £2. It's the first in a series of price reductions, and the target is free prescriptions for all by the year 2011. And people will now pay £5. The price varies around the country. In England, the cost has gone up today to £7.10. In Wales, it is now a year since free prescriptions were introduced, while in Northern Ireland, the cost remains £6.85. A price freeze has been set in place. Well, now, let's try and return to our main story, the dramatic events this evening in Zimbabwe, where there are claims from opposition sources that President Mugabe may be about to step aside and that there are some negotiations apparently underway as we speak. So let's join the BBC's Ian Pannell, who is inside Zimbabwe for us. Ian, could you give us the latest that you have on what kind of talks may be happening right now?
Yes, I've been speaking to three unnamed sources within the opposition movement for democratic change in Zimbabwe, and they all have a fairly similar story. They all claim that they have almost reached a deal for President Mugabe to stand down. My understanding is that talks have been brokered by South African negotiators over the last few days in the capital, Harare. However, Johannesburg has denied any involvement in this. Representatives of the military and the police are believed to have been involved in the discussions,